Good evening to everyone, and very warm welcome to you all to today's book discussion on and celebration of a landmark book, Padu Padmanabhan's First Fuel, India's Energy Efficiency Journey and a Radical Vision for Sustainability. Energy efficiency, otherwise known as the first fuel, has often been touted as the most cost-effective near-term solution to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and address climate change. But the question we must ask is, are we on track to harness India's potential for energy efficiency? What has been its record thus far, and what further needs to be done to accelerate the pace and direction of energy efficiency in the country? And more specifically, are there any lessons that one can learn from the 4-decade-long experience that the country has in advancing energy efficiency? Today's discussion has been organized with an eye to finding answers to some of these questions, particularly in light of the developments and events that are narrated in the book First Fuel. The intent is also to encourage ideas and identify areas for additional research and action. We have an incredible panel with us today, in which the author Padu Padmanabhan himself will be participating. Padu, for those of you who don't know, joined the National Productivity Council in 1974, followed by a decade at the World Bank, Washington, D.C., and another at the USAID India, which gave him a ringside view of energy programs in India and the developing world. The post-liberalization years saw him help design some of India's finest bilateral programs with the US that leveraged over $1 billion in developmental investments. He has also served as the former director of the South Asia Regional Initiative on Energy and was responsible for the establishment of several centers of excellence for energy efficiency in India, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. He is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Global Clean Energy Award in 2007, by the Swiss-based Transatlantic 21 and the Energy Manager of the Year Award 2019 by the Association of Energy Engineers in the US. Also joining us today is Dr. Koshi Cherel, Program Director for Renewable Energy at the Center for Science and Environment. Prior to this, he was the facilitator and one of the founders, along with Dr. Satish Kumar, today's moderator, and Padu Padmanabhan, and several CEOs and stakeholders from the energy efficiency industry of the Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy, also known as the AEEE, which was incorporated in 2008 as the voice of the energy efficiency industry. He led the AEEE Secretariat as its president from 2008 to 2017, and subsequently as the principal advisor till 2019-20. Dr. Koshi has around 35 years of work experience, both in the corporate sector as well as in non-governmental institutions such as the Society of Indian Automobile Manufacturers. A warm welcome to Mr. Prabir Neogi as well. Mr. Neogi is an engineering graduate from Jadavpur University and holds a diploma in finance and accounting management. He has significant experience in the power and coal sectors with exposure to policy, reforms, regulation, and organizational design, having worked with CESC and as the chief executive at the Noida Power Company. Subsequently, he has served as president of Integrated Coal Mining, which undertakes captive coal mining for CESC's generating plants. Currently, as chief advisor, corporate affairs of RP Sanjeev Goenka Group, he's assisting group companies in policy and regulatory matters impacting individual businesses. Could I request Padu Padmanabhan and Mr. Prabir Neogi and Dr. Koshi Cherel to please join us at the panel. Could Dr. Satish Kumar join us as well? Dr. Kumar will be moderating today's discussion. He serves as the president and executive director of the Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy. Since 2015, he has led the transformation of the Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy into a leading think tank and industry platform through a combination of programmatic and technical leadership, fundraising, and collaboration. He serves as a senior energy efficiency advisor to the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, the Niti Aayog, Bureau of Energy Efficiency Services Limited, and the Department of Science and Technology. Prior to the AEEE, he was the Energy Efficiency Ambassador and led the energy management business at the Schneider Electric India, a scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, the chief of party for a USAID-supported bilateral energy efficiency technical assistance program between the US and the Indian government, and has been a co-founder of Efficiency Valuation Organization and the Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy. We also have Tanmay Tathagat. Mr. Tathagat, if I could request you to join the panel, who has agreed to join us today at the last minute. Tanmay has over 28 years of international experience in the domain of climate change, migration, and sustainable development, building energy efficiency, indoor air quality, green buildings, and standards and labeling in Asia, Africa, and the US. He led the development of the Energy Conservation Building Code in India and several countries. He has extensive experience in green building design, energy stimulation, thermal comfort, indoor environment, architectural and mechanical design, and green building certification processes. He's an acknowledged expert in building integrated design. Tanmay has an MS in building design from Arizona State University and a Bachelor of Architecture from the School of Planning and Architecture in New Delhi, India. He's a part of the CII's Health and Wellbeing Rating Committee, Net Zero Energy Committee, and the Net Zero Carbon Committee. Could I have a round of applause for our eminent panelists? And before I hand over to Dr. Kumar, Padu, could I request you to say a few words?
Good evening, Mrs. Tista Sarkar, Editor Pan Macmillan, Dr. Satish Kumar, President AEEE, my fellow panelists. Tista, thanks a lot for putting this together. You have been a source of great support, right from conceiving the book to publishing and printing the book. And Satish, thanks for moderating it. And fellow panelists, those whom I've had the privilege and opportunity to work together with for almost 3 to 4 decades with some of them. And thank you all for coming. I see some familiar faces in the audience. Again, thanks. Let me preface my comments with 2 questions which I'm often asked. One is, why the title First Fuel? And the second question is, what made you write this book in the first place? Why the title First Fuel? It was, I think, in 2005 when the ex-president of India, Dr. Abdul Kalam, made a comment at a seminar which I happened to be attending, and he said, energy efficiency is our 5th source of energy. And it got me thinking. And he explained that you have coal and oil and nuclear and renewables, and then energy efficiency, and it's the 5th source of energy. And me and some friends of mine, we did some number crunching, and we said, no, it's not the 5th. There's been an accounting mistake by the Honorable President. It's actually the 1st source of energy. More energy has been saved than has been generated either by coal or oil or even renewables. Around the same time, the International Energy Agency in Paris did its own analysis and found in 11 of the 17 countries, OECD countries that they were active in, that indeed efficiency has saved more energy than has been generated through conventional fuels, and they called it the first fuel. So that was really the reason why I said efficiency is the first fuel in India. Now, why did I try to write this book? See, if you go to any bookstore or any library, you would find there are several books on energy. But But most of the books on the supply side of the energy equation, you have books on coal and you have books on power and you have books on oil in the power sector, reforms and so on and so forth. And you do have a few books on the demand side management of energy. But they are treatises of energy audits or case studies, extremely technical. And it did occur to me that there was space here to talk about the history of energy efficiency so that the next generation can be proud, can learn, be sensitized on what had happened, what the earlier generation had done in developing energy efficiency in this country. There are several unsung heroes, lesser known institutions, and I tried to pull all of that together over a 4 to 5 decade period. Institutions which probably don't exist today, but which played a major role in making energy efficiency happen. There were two happenings, actually, and I'd like to just focus on these two. The book explains it in some detail, which can be traced to the early genesis of energy efficiency. One was a sheer accident, a happenstance. And the other was, let's put it as good bureaucratic judgment by some intrepid bureaucrats in the government. And it'll be interesting for a moment to dwell on those two happenings. It was in 1965 when in Bombay, in Mumbai, the textile industry was in a quandary. They were receiving coal from Bengal, Bihar. The supply of coal was not very reliable because there was a wagon shortage. The railways had a wagon shortage those days. And secondly, getting the coal over the Western Ghats, the steep inclines of the Western Ghats, there were accidents. So the supply of coal was not very consistent. Apart from that, coal requires a lot of storage space, and even in those days, space was at a premium in Bombay. So the coal industry, the textile industry was looking for alternatives. At the same time, some of you will remember that in Chembur we had two refineries, both were in the private sector, Esso and Burma Shell. And both those refineries had excess of heavy bottoms of furnace oil, which they wanted to dispose. There was a problem here because Indian industry at that point in time did not know how to use oil. Very few industries were using oil, if at all. And textile industry certainly was using coal in their age-old Lancashire boilers, did not know how to use oil. So they were in a quandary. The industry wanted to know how to use oil. The Planning Commission was seized of this problem, and they approached the National Institute of Fuel Efficiency Services of UK, whether you could help in this energy substitution. So a team from NIFES came in 1966 or thereabouts. That was before I had even joined the field, so I'm not that old. And they actually worked with an Indian institution known as the National Productivity Council, set up a fuel efficiency service, provided support to the textile industry to shift from coal to oil, and that service the NPC carried forward. That was one development which happened as an accident. So what started as energy substitution turned out to be a fuel efficiency kind of a program. The other was a more strategic direction which energy efficiency got through the Fuel Policy Committee report. Again, the Government of India commissioned a study on India's fuel import-export balance, supply-demand balance, the Fuel Policy Committee report, the first of its kind in the country. And that report made an observation that India needs to set up a standing committee on fuel efficiency. In those days, the word energy efficiency was not known, so it's the word fuel efficiency. Recognize at that point in time, there were only two countries in the world which had some kind of a policy on energy efficiency. One was the UK, because after the Second World War, there was shortage of fuels, so the UK necessarily had to set up a fuel efficiency service, and indeed they did so. The second country was Japan. Japan had always been importing fuels. They don't have any energy resource of their own, so energy security was a major issue. They set up the heat management law in 1952. The third country was India through the Fuel Policy Committee report. And like every other report, it gathered dust in the government. No one even looked at it, and it was forgotten. But in 73, when the oil price hike took place, some intrepid bureaucrats in the government, they referred to this report, used this report as a basis, and set up India's first committee on furnace oil utilization. And this committee recommended a study which was conducted by the National Productory Council, because in the meanwhile, between 1966 to 73, the NPC had developed some muscle in energy efficiency, or fuel efficiency as they called it. And many of us were recruited, and we were part of that group. And that group did studies in several sectors of industry, and that led to the formation of the Petroleum Conservation Research Association, PCRA, which was the first institutional arrangement by developed or developing countries in the world dedicated to petroleum fuel conservation. I'm telling you all this because there's an history to all this. There were individuals who were involved in many of these issues. But the efficiency movement didn't stop there. From fuel efficiency, it pivoted to energy conservation. The industrial sector took leadership in that area, at least the large sectors of industry, and that continued with the adoption of energy audit as an article of faith, which we did rather well. And in fact, there's a description that we have taken energy audit to very ridiculous lengths in this country, but that's another subject. And it also led to the term energy efficiency being a buzzword. So energy audit function improved to the 90s and 2000 and so on. Then in 2010-15, some of the large industries, the large corporates, took it upon themselves to move from energy efficiency to energy productivity. That's the development we are still seeing here. Energy efficiency at the boiler room to energy productivity at the boardroom. This whole emphasis was largely due to the role of certain heroes, which I call them heroes because there were people with stature who had seen through this and who had actually taken leadership, and the book describes their role. As I said, the idea here was to describe this in the form of narratives, in the form of stories. Story is not like, bedside stories, although some of them do tend to kind of describe things in a very easy to readable manner. That was the idea. But also to bring out the decision-making characteristic of individuals and institutions who were involved in much of this. But the point I would like to make, and I'll end after this, is that moving from energy substitution in the 60s to fuel efficiency, to energy efficiency, to energy productivity is nothing but a dress rehearsal. We have done this over the past 30 to 40 years with some modicum of success. There have been failures too, and the book does not make it appear to be everything is hunky-dory and we have done everything. There's a lot more to be done. There are sectors which have yet to be touched, but that's another point. But the question is, now the challenge is decarbonization, net zero. Again, studies have beginning to indicate that India could meet 35 to 40% of its decarbonization goals if it were to take energy efficiency to its logical conclusion. And the contention I have, and the book touches upon that, is that now with this background of ours, we are in a position to make the next big thrust and get into really realizing decarbonization. So the question is, are we prepared to accept this challenge? I make the argument in the book that we are, if the past journey is any indication, because the past journey has shown that we have met certain goals. but we really need to pull ourselves by our bootstraps. So let me conclude with the words of Noam Chomsky. The reason I mention it is that he's an American philosopher who actually was interviewed by some of us and by me at some stage, and he's quite familiar with the Indian context, and who said, "The pandemic is a mere flea bite in the face of the larger threat that looms over the world and indeed India. We should bear in mind that as severe as this crisis is, there is worse coming by way of disruptions in the weather. There will be recovery from the pandemic, but no recovery from the melting of the polar ice sheets or the glaciers in the Himalayas, which will render much of South Asia uninhabitable if the world persists on its present course." This is, of course, well known. I'm not saying anything which is not known. We are facing existential threat. But the question is, as we are addressing this threat, I find, well, there's a lot of emphasis on renewables and so on and so forth, and rightly so. Here is an energy resource that we have, which is not getting the attention it deserves. Energy efficiency is an energy resource. We must remember that. It's like oil and coal, no different. The moment we recognize that, then there's a strong case to be made for taking energy efficiency to the next level. Some of the details will be discussed by the panel as to how they envisage the growth of energy efficiency. So let me stop here. The book raises some of these issues, as Teesta very rightly said. It fleetingly touches upon issues. Obviously, it cannot touch upon every issue, but fleetingly touches upon these issues, but with the hope that it's like a living document where people can refer to it and then say, yeah, we need to do further studies, further research in these areas. And the purpose of this meeting, which is organized by Pan Macmillan with IIC, was really to bring to attention some of the areas where further investigation, research, analysis needs to be done. So let me stop here and request Dr. Satish Kumar, President AEEE, and who's very well known to all of you, to moderate this session of very eminent panelists. I'm extremely pleased that we could get panelists of this quality here to explore further the future role of energy efficiency as a principal decarbonization strategy. I don't want to hedge my bets on this. I call it the principal decarbonization strategy going forward. Supportive of renewable, they're two sides of the same coin, but important in and by itself, and thus provide practical shape and a roadmap to some of the ideas discussed, somewhat fleetingly in the book. Thank you for your patient listening.
So, first of all, a very warm welcome to everybody in the audience, and it's indeed a pleasure and an honor to be invited by Padu to moderate this panel. I can't say no to Padu, so I think this is just my humble attempt to do justice to this body of work that Padu has produced. What I would do is I would start with a quote which I feel characterizes the work of Mr. Padmanabhan over like last 30 to 40 years, I think, that he has been working in the field. So this quote is by Viktor Frankl. He is a concentration camp survivor and a very eminent psychologist. And he says that between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So I think that what Padu described, I think, in his opening remarks, it's kind of alluding to, I think, what shaped his life and which has probably touched all of us in some very, very unique ways. And sometimes we can blame our circumstances and other things, but truly, I think the decision making lies with us, I think, in terms of how we are responding to the circumstances, I think, that is surrounding us. And what Padu described, I think, in terms of his evolution from a young engineer who joined NPC to an author who has penned this book, I think is, in my opinion, I think he responses to the different circumstances that Padu has experienced. And I just want to show a picture that I cherish. So I don't have a screen, but can you see this picture? So this picture was taken on 3rd of August 2021. Padu, do you recognize this picture?
Yeah.
So this is Padu handing me this book, this First Fuel in Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh is very dear to both me and Padu. I did my PhD at Carnegie Mellon. So I try to visit Pittsburgh, I think, even I am visiting US. And Padu, permanent, I think his second home is in Pittsburgh. So we often meet in Pittsburgh, actually, when we are visiting or when we are there. So this meeting happened at Professor Volker Hartkopf and Vivian Loftness, who has been my professors at Carnegie Mellon. And they invited Padu to join, and I think I'm a recipient of his signed book. So I really cherish this picture, but just wanted to show this thing. Another thing that I would just briefly mention is, I think, I don't know how many people, I mean, cricket is a religion, so I am using a metaphor here. There was a video that came out where Rahul Dravid was commenting on Shane Warne. And he said that what really, I think, impressed Dravid, or I think on Shane Warne, was not like his flamboyance, or I think his bigger than, larger than God kind of personality, but he said that this guy was always ready to talk cricket. I think no matter where you meet, he was just so much into cricket that he will get into the details of this thing. And I think this gentleman who is sitting on my left is a person who is always willing to talk on energy efficiency. So I think whether we are talking about greening of the supply chain, whether we are talking energy audits and its role in industrial energy efficiency and other things, whether we are talking efficiency of furnaces and boilers, whether we are talking institutional building, role of institutions at a national level and their positioning, I think whether we are talking about program design by World Bank or USAID or any bilateral initiatives, green building, measurement and verification, energy productivity, energy or just transition. I was listening to Padu, I think when he was mentioning. So I think the arc of Padu's career that has taken him to all these points is truly staggering in my opinion, and I think it's really a privilege for many of us. I think for him, Padu is a guru. I think I truly consider that he's one of those people who has a bird's eye view and a very different perspective in terms of how energy efficiency has evolved in the country and what is the role of, I think, different institutions, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So I think with that background, I know Padu has set the context about how this book came about, and I think what are some of the things that he has touched upon. What I am going to do, because I think there has been a little bit of a shift in, but maybe I will start with, I think, a couple of topics, and I'll see, maybe I'll request Mr. Prabir Niyogi to go first. And I think these are some of the things related to the positioning of energy efficiency in the Indian context. And some of the things relate to, I think, what Padu described, that there is a supply side, I think, when we talk about energy, and when we talk about demand side. And I think when we are talking about the regulatory framework or distribution utilities and these things, so electricity, of course, plays a very, very important role. Energy efficiency is just not electricity, we all know that. But I think how the electricity sector has evolved, what integrated resource planning or loading order, or I think these concepts have meant in the Indian context. I think that's something that is very important, and it's something where I think it is being looked at by utilities, by regulators in new light as more demand centers or load centers have evolved from, say, industry to buildings to cooling and other things, which is also taking an equitable proportion in terms of who gets access to electricity, how do we protect people from heat stress that I think a lot of people are going to get exposed. And the second topic that maybe Prabirji you can address is also the institutional kind of like positioning, And I think feel free, I think anybody else who wants to talk about some of these things. So we know that energy efficiency touches residential, commercial, industrial, also I think municipal and many of these segments. But also in terms of like how different, I think, entities play an important role. So I think nationally there are regulatory bodies, there are policy making bodies, and what is, I think, their positioning, what can actually that do to a country's vision of how a particular segment is evolving is also very, very critical. So I am going to invite Prabir Niyogi ji, I think, to shed, I think, some light, I think, from his wisdom and experience that I think he has accumulated. But also feel free to, I think, share anything on the book that you would like to. I think we know that this is an informal discussion. So over to you.
So, given the weightage you have given and the topics you have identified. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Kumar, and it's really an honor and privilege to be here and to be associated with the book discussion, which my dear friend Padu, with whom I have worked for many years, since the last 2 decades. So it's just a privilege to be here. But as I was mentioning, Dr. Kumar, that given the weightage of the topics you have identified, I would rather take the podium and try and address some of the topics which you have identified. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As I said, it's certainly a privilege and honor to be here, and Dr. Kumar and fellow panelists, and of course my dear friend Padu. So bear with me for the next few minutes. Firstly, let me, I can't resist the temptation of putting Padu's book in the context of what's happening in recent times and keeping the background of energy transition, decarbonization, and a net zero future in limelight. So if you have seen the IPCC report, which was the product of Working Group 3, it came out with some startling revelations. It said that it's now or never, it's do or die approach, unless we act. But it also said that there is enormous scope of demand side intervention. And that's where Padu's book has the context. I mean, he is recounting his experience over a span of almost 50 years, and it's so relevant today. He had talked about energy transition, right from the beginning, and which was just a concept in the late 80s. The IPCC report went further, and it said that there is a broadened scope of climate policy. And it includes energy efficiency in industry, green building codes, air pollution policies for clean power generation, and renewable energy included, of course, and certainly, there is a scope for clean coal technologies, CCUS included. It also went further, and that is, Padu's one of the most favorite topics and a term he had coined in the Indian context. It said agricultural policies for lowering electricity and water demand. And Padu had talked about water and energy nexus, as I know, 2 decades back, something he had implemented in the context of Noida Power Company, for which I was working in those days. So that's the kind of relevance Padu has. And since Dr. Kumar, you mentioned of policies, these are the policies we need. Do we have the agricultural policies, for economizing both demand and water consumption? Do we have the policies for having the air pollution controlled under clean power generation? We do have emission norms, but how effective is the implementation? And this is also where institutional strengthening will have to play a role. So it's a clear case of building cross-sector coordination of policy implementation with the participation of concerned ministries. So it's not just a single ministry. And what we do not have in today's context is an integrated energy policy, which is what we have been struggling for over quite a few years. We have a national electricity policies, although dated, but not really an integrated energy policy which would have looked at and examined all the fuel options we have to bring into our economic activity. Now, moving forward, Dr. Kumar talked about the policy framework, and which is of course a favorite subject. The IPCC also mentioned about a policy package, not merely a policy framework. And the package is a combination of policy instruments and governance structure. And that is again where the institutional capacity will come into play when you talk of governance structure. It is about program evaluation, it is about project review, it's about implementation. Now, to give you an example, what the EU does, they have basically looked at net zero buildings. And I'm giving the example basically to signify how a policy package can be made effective. So when EU is talking of net zero buildings, it is also stating or clearly articulating what are the building and appliance codes. A. What are the labeling programs? So, there is now a push factor. So that's the policy instrument. It is also talking of a long-term national strategy for renovation of buildings in the context of building sustainable cities. Now, that's the linkages they are providing. And then again, as everybody knows that energy efficiency is also will be a product of behavioral science. It is also providing renovation and retrofitting programs for low-income households by channeling funds from the emission trading scheme. So, we don't have the concept. So that means, we are taxing carbon, we are generating revenue, but we are pumping it back into the economy to support those who deserve. So that's the kind of program, policy support we need to have. Regrettably, we do have a clean coal cess, but we know what the outcome has been. It has found its way into a GST compensation mechanism. Now, we don't have this kind of redistributional policies in order to channelize funds to support those who would need the kind of financial backup once we have the energy efficiency programs brought into the scheme of things. So this is as far as policy is concerned. I'm not talking about the industrial efficiency space just because the interventions would be more of technical in nature. But what has also come to the fore is that because of the current crisis, energy intensive industries are almost having more than 40 to 50% of their production costs enhanced. Just because the fuel and commodity prices have been skyrocketing because of the geopolitical situation. So again, there is a case. The business case could never have been stronger as in the current crisis. Now, coming back to India, see the BNEF, the Bloomberg New Energy Fund, it has identified that India's energy consumption is going to go up by end of FY23 to the extent of 15%. So it's almost from 1400 billion units to 1600 billion units. Now there are two observations. One is, had we had energy efficiency structured into our processes, it wouldn't have the increase would have been a bit curtailed. One. Two is the way we operate, the way we have the so-called AT&C or T&D losses, that also goes into a leaking pipeline. So again, it's a question of how energy efficiency need to be curtailed, need to be strengthened in order to reach the outcome of a power efficient country. Now, again, building on that, what is churning out? If energy efficiency has to be indoctrinated and cultivated amongst the populace, and Dr. Kumar, please tell me if I am overstepping time. Right. So again, but if the behavioral and lifestyle changes have to be brought in, then there have to be certain interventions, and these interventions will be in the form of a regulatory compact that would also compensate the utility. Why? Because the utility will have a loss of revenue, it will incur program costs, and it will also require some incentives in order to invest. Now again, the global practice has been that there is a very clear scheme of program cost recovery of distribution income, and share in saving arising out of energy consumption. So once you can indoctrinate that, once you institutionalize that, then the regulatory compact is in place for the utility to be incentivized and customers to be drawn in. But then again, customers will have to be given a fair amount of monetary incentive in order to either undertake voluntary shifting of load or participate in interruptible load programs, which in turn the distribution company can buy back. So this is a kind of regulatory or institutional backup that is needed. Now to end up, I have to cut it short because obviously I'm keeping other speakers waiting in queue. To wind up, I would just say that you would need a whole of government approach linking energy, economy, and efficiency together, and just to make sure that the institutions work in tandem. I draw from the 6 pillars of Gati Shakti program, which the Prime Minister has inaugurated and which is now going to be implemented in the context of project implementation in the country. And the 6 pillars are comprehensiveness, B, prioritization, C, optimization, 4, synchronization, 5, critical analysis, and 6, dynamic review. So when you have this package taken together, combined in the form of institutional capability, capacity building, which will be monitoring the projects, implementing the programs, and finally measuring the outcomes, then we will have the energy efficiency initiatives cultivated and indoctrinated both amongst customers and amongst end-use applications. Thank you.
Question?
No, we can have questions at the end.
At the end? Or
I think we'll have questions at the end. Let's have the speakers. Koshi.
Koshi, just I think maybe just a 30-second thing. One anecdote that I just want to share because it's relevant to our next speaker is that Padu was instrumental in, I think, bringing me back to India because I think there was a USAID project which brought me back. And that's when I think I got to know, I think both Dr. Koshi Charel and Tanmay Tathagat a little bit more closely. So I will invite Koshi, I think, for sharing his perspectives over the next 5-6 minutes in terms of the role of NGOs, because Koshi has spent a considerable amount of time there. And also, I think what both Prabirji mentioned as well as I think Padu has mentioned, that what is the private sector's role in terms of I think implementing energy efficiency, because again Koshi has worked on ESCO and energy efficiency financing and some of these other things. So Padu, Koshi, if you can cover probably those two topics or anything else that you want to touch upon based on, I think, what book is talking about. And I think in the interest of time, maybe like 5-6 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Satish. Padu and the book has been something very, very personal to me also because, over the period of past 30 years, since I came to Delhi in 1990, right up to 2022, when I look back, the way his own career evolved and how he brought in a lot of young people and got them inspired into this is really an amazing thing. I mean, he had a vision for India, even though he had the chance to continue with World Bank and USAID. And at each time, he was out scouting for youngsters who he could give a snippet of advice or suggestion and ideas. And I think more than anybody, I have benefited the most from his ideas, even though probably about very few of them have materialized into concrete work. So when I saw the book, I could really realize at different stages of my career how we moved from one concept to the other. Initially, it was how fuel efficiency moved on to energy efficiency, and then the work of NPC and all. And it's how he influenced people, and that comes out very well in the book, and also how he moved the needle across various sectors. My first memory of him was when I was working with Dr. Bhaskar Natarajan at EMC about the Orissa reforms and a team coming from there in the 1990s. And I didn't know what it was all about, but I tracked 2-3 people like Padu for one and a few others who were there and tried to meet them and communicate with them. And actually, that way, the whole power reforms was set in motion at that time. And then, right through the early energy management center, which people like Pramod Dev from the government side took forward, I think a lot of the changes that have happened is from individuals like him, and also through people like that who had a personal interest beyond their careers and work that is important. And the story of AEEE is even more amazing because before that, USAID had tried to form the Council for Energy Efficiency with a few industrialists, small organizations. And then there was another attempt where I, along with a few, we were trying to form Indian Council for Promotion of Energy Efficiency Business. And there again, each of us knew Padu and we tried to do our bit. But finally, the thrust came when Satish took over as Eco3 head. And that is one activity which required a lot of inputs and participation by experts and people like Tanmay and many organizations together. And on the side, Satish convened the right people, the CEOs of Thermax, Forbes Marshall, and Schneider Electric, and Conserve Systems, a small company from Bangalore, which was very instrumental in moving the needle in that side. And all along, the Padu was giving the right push at the right time. And, finally, I was like the postman who was carrying mail between these 3-4 people. And this core CEOs realized that unless they put their own money into it, you cannot have an association which can have a life of its own. The government would not respect it or would not, you can't keep, depending on government's funding for that. And that's a model which Padu helped evolve. And Satish took it forward through his role in Eco3. A lot of activities we did was in support of that, but at the same time, we ensured there was enough participation from different segments and stakeholders. And also, when Padu was discussing the book, I said, Padu, now everybody's talking about climate change and you're only stopping with energy efficiency. What about the next part of it? How do we integrate renewables? And I was looking at the last chapter, that is where he has left off. And Padu, it's an unfinished task. I've also promised you that we would work together on the renewable side. And I never imagined I'll come back to Delhi with CSC with a totally blank, clean slate to start work on this side, distributed rural energy. And I think there are more things that I'd share, but I would want to hear more from other people who have worked with Padu. So it's a really exciting time to be on this table with people whom I have admired most, and to be able to share my views on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Koshi. And I think the journey of AEEE that you just mentioned, I think we know it has not been an easy one. And I think your trial and tribulations, I think he has allowed AEEE to kind of dream bigger. So thank you for, I think, your leadership there. Also, I would just like to echo that the timing and the context in which AEEE energy efficiency is placed cannot be, I think, more powerful because of, I think, India's commitment to the COP26 and a lot of, I think, studies showing that energy efficiency can accomplish a significant pie. The challenge remains, I think, in terms of arranging financing, scaling up efficiency, and I think reducing the transaction cost. I think people who work in this sector know about these things. So lastly, I will request a dear friend, Mr. Tanmay Tathagat. I think we have worked on some of the common policy areas. We both are very passionate about building energy efficiency. We both have worked closely with Padu and USAID, I think, in our different roles. And I think Tanmay is also, I think, one of the leading experts, I think, in the introductory remarks. I think it was mentioned that he's also one of the very few people that I know who do, I think, move between the private sector, doing the consulting role as well as the policy role. And I think it requires some finesse, it requires understanding of, I think, both the sectors. And not just that, I think he also is quite well versed on the technology front because of his work on the standards and labeling program. And these are like really the pillars of any national energy efficiency policy, if you talk about. So whether it is in India or US, I think these are the program. And so Tanmay, if you can share your kind of journey and I think what Padu is talking about and how I think you have, I think also benefited through your association with Padu, I think that would be great. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Satish. Okay. And thank you, Padu. It was just fortunate that I arrived early and get to sit here and share this one very important part of the journey that you have, that you talk about in your book. So, yeah, a lot of people have already talked about it. My personal journey in this area of energy efficiency in India, to a large extent, would not have happened without some part of what is described in this book as the journey of energy efficiency had not happened. And Padu being, of course, instrumental in that journey. So, Prabir also talked about this whole aspect of one specific issue of, say, buildings. And I'll just focus on that as an illustration of what the book talks about and where things have moved and where things could go. Padu talks about this whole green building movement in the book. And I've urged him that there is a parallel book which is all personal anecdotes and the stories of people behind that also could form another book. But the whole idea was that this constant thinking about energy efficiency and the way it can really help build a nation, I would almost use that word, was the impetus that resulted in formation of the Indian Green Building Council. And Padu brought together the right institutions from the US and India to just seed this idea. And there's a whole story behind it, which I would rather have Padu say and recount than I telling the story again. But from in the last maybe a decade or so, this one institutional intervention and a really small seed amount from 2002 to now, India is now 10 billion square feet of green buildings. It's the third largest country in terms of the number of green buildings being built. The entire industry of that comes around green buildings, and that is not just energy efficiency.
It's energy efficiency, it's efficiency in manufacturing of cement and steel, because that's also part of your green buildings. The number of new job opportunities have all fueled from that one intervention. And one of the key things that I get from this book, and which kind of is obvious, but is also to be studied and taken to the next level, is this linkage between policy, regulatory part of this vision and the market and finance part of this vision. And this journey on green buildings has done both. So in 2002-3, this whole idea of green building germinated, IGBC was formed, and this happened. Around the same time, Padu put together this program for looking at energy efficiency as a whole and building sector in particular, that resulted in Bureau of Energy Efficiency coming up with their first action plan. In fact, even before the building code, they had an action plan. And two items on the action plan, which you can see the result now in particular, were energy conservation building code and appliance standards and labeling. And those two again came about this thinking about the long-term vision. And I was fortunate that happened to be there when both of these things were happening. The first ever labeling program happened, the first ever building code happened. Now, from that time till now, we've had two revisions of the building code. It has been taken up, but I still feel that all the ideals and the vision that we had still need to be studied and taken to their logical conclusion, because we have stopped short. We have come almost to the goalpost, but we are now sort of hesitating to cross the threshold. Codes are there, they're still not mandatory. We talked about integrated energy policy, but it's still sort of really still there as a fantastic idea and a program that has a future. From I completely agree with this whole approach of looking at an integrated approach for buildings as the last mile of our smart grid, which is fed with renewable energy. And it requires that policy push, a business plan where there is a win-win. So the current relevance of what I see from this book is we need to look at the next level. The world is talking about, and India is now leading the effort in grid interactive net zero energy buildings. That's where all these ideas come together. The integrated energy and carbon vision is also going to impact our lives, because both Padu and Prabir have talked about what I call sufficiency of frugality, which is the aspect of not just being more efficient, but using less in a way which is bound to our ethos, but is also bound to our future. And that's where I see this book leading us, and that's where it ends. So, yeah, I look forward to where this journey takes us now.
Thank you, Tanmay. And I think with that, I'm going to sort of end this panel discussion with a big thanks, of course, to Padu for, I think, writing this book, I think, which brought us together. And you want to say something? Okay, I think Koshi, maybe just short, yeah.
Yeah, Tanmay was mentioning about how Padu created institutions, and we are missing Raghupati here. Padu's role in building up the IGBC, especially in terms of joining the USGBC and bringing together the right people, is truly amazing. And probably he expected something similar of AEEE, which is on its way there perhaps, but how he has built up and knit together. And this is just a single one example. There are many other institutions all the way to Kerala where he has set up women's energy efficiency movement. It's really amazing. And I think there's a lot of, many people can take it forward from what you started off, Padu. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think thanks, Koshi, for wrapping it up, because I think the partnership that Padu built, I think that has been a hallmark. Some of the institutions that got either directly established or through USAID grant, I think is also very, very important.
But
and
what I'm really proud about, interesting, anecdote. You see, when we did this fuel efficiency work in the 70s, we had very little equipment with us. And I recall that there was a factory in Delhi, in Najafgarh. It's a chemical factory, and we went there to conserve fuel oil. And the instruments that we had was a thermocouple, a gas analyzer, and a handkerchief. Now, with these three, we went to that factory, and I went with my boss, and I've described him, the architect, the father of energy efficiency in India was one P.R. Srinivasan of NPC. No more now, but he conceived this in the 60s. Very few people in the world really conceived it the way that he conceived it. Of course, the term climate change was not known, so he couldn't make that connection, but he did make the economic connection of efficiency. Anyway, that's another story. So I went with him, and we went around that factory, and just with a handkerchief, he was able to show where the air is infiltrating into the boiler and why that is causing the boiler to be less efficient. And with the gas analyzer, he was able to see whether the combustion efficiency is high. Anyway, the end story is 20 to 25% oil could be saved. Now, there was one guy, a youngster, I was also young, I was in my 20s, another guy, who was observing all this. And he took it up as his career and set up India's largest energy service company today. And he met me after reading the book, and he said, "Do you remember that visit you made?" I said, "Yeah, that was in 75, 76. He said, "I was inspired. Just with 3 simple, less than 100 rupee stuff, you'll save so much of energy." I said, "I'll make this my career." So like this, there have been a number of instances where people were really pushing the frontiers of energy efficiency. I think that was important. The other quick point, because that's very relevant to today, very relevant to what all Prabir said, because Prabir brings in enormous understanding of the regulatory and policy issues related to efficiency. And one point that he made, which he couldn't elaborate because of the time, is this institutional repositioning. See, it's so very important that we are so exclusively focused on the supply side of the energy equation, even to this day. We have done well, no doubt about it. We need to now kind of open the doors to the demand side of the equation, and it cannot possibly be done. I find Mr. Sabharwal isn't here, he was BE, he could have probably reacted to this. Until and unless we reposition the energy efficiency strategy in the country from institutions that are working on the supply side. You can't have the fox guarding the chicken coop. You cannot have ex-ministry on the supply side trying to manage the efficiency side of things, because that's not in their purview. You see, the question is very simple. I'm the secretary of a ministry on the supply side, and there's an ESCO with a visiting card waiting outside my room, and there's a chairman of, don't quote me here, let's say NTPC there. Whom is he going to call into the room? He's not going to call the ESCO, he's going to call the chairman of NTPC, the supply side. Because they're all oriented toward supply management, all the budgets are there. One has to, like in the US, for instance, energy efficiency is in DOE, but the China walls between them and the supply side. In Philippines, it's all a different ministry. I think if we are going to look at efficiency as a major strategy for decarbonization, we need to have a ministry for energy efficiency. Or at least we should have an oversight from the Prime Minister's office. I've not mentioned that in the book because I thought maybe that may be a little bit of an overkill, but I thought I'm in Delhi, I'm here. I rarely visit Delhi in the last few years, my first visit. But I thought I'll just like to make this point that we really seriously need to look at efficiency as a major strategic element of energy planning, as an energy resource, and have a ministry on. If you can have a ministry for renewables, and I said in the beginning, we have saved more energy than renewables has generated. I'm willing to do the calculation anytime. And you have a ministry for renewables for the last 40 years. Fine, I like it. I like renewables. I'm not anti-renewables. I like it. And here is a source which has been generating time and again energy by not using energy. I think it's time. The last point is on the green building. You see, this is collaboration, cooperation. A few of us had the opportunity to bring about a partnership between entities in the US and here, and that resulted. But it is also the leadership of the private sector. I think that's extremely important. We have not talked much about the private sector here, but the green building movement is a case in point where the private sector really came and pitched forward. We have done very well in certain sectors where the private sector has taken the initiative, whether it's the IT sector, no regulations from the government, IT moved forward. As somebody said, the beauty sector also, you know, Miss India, Miss World, etc., private sector. And now this green building movement. Today India is number 3, you said? I thought it was number 2. We are about 15 billion square feet.
India, Canada, and then
You know better. You're closer to the event than I am. But we started with 20,000 square feet in Hyderabad. CII, first green building. They wanted it to be a platinum awarded building. I recall the meeting in Washington with the Indian Green Building Council. It wasn't set up then. The US Green Building Council person was there, and they were talking about platinum buildings in the US, etc. And I had a very, very resourceful architect on our side who knew a little bit about green building. None of us knew anything about green building in the year 2000. And he said the first green building will be in India, and it'll be a platinum awarded building. And I remember the lady on the other side said, well, India, how could you ever do that? I mean, she poo-pooed the whole thing. Anyway, we came back, we regrouped, talked with CII, Mr. Godrej pitched in, AID pitched in with resources, and in quick time, we were able to get a good team here, and the first platinum building was built in 2003, inaugurated by the Honorable President Kalam, and it was a platinum awarded building. And since then, it began to roll forward. And we have got how many buildings now? 1,500, 2,000?
no, there were
certified.
over 8,000.
8,000, yeah.
10 billion square feet.
10 billion square feet. So, all of this gives me the feeling that having achieved on the green building front and on the industrial front, we can go on and on the industrial front too. So much, some of our industries like cement and others have got energy intensity figures which are as efficient as any in the world. But there's a lot more to be done. And we can go on and on. I like your ending, frugality. And I'd just like to say that, you know, doing without is also as important, if not more important, than being efficient. Lifestyles and all that matter. And that's another area where we can show the world, because our lifestyles, by definition, are energy efficient and energy consciousness. And we have not put that as an important strategy in what we want to do. I haven't discussed that because that brings in elements that you want to reduce our standard of living, we have to keep up our standard of living, and so on and so forth, and I agree with that. But we could continue with our standard of living with less amount of energy. That's the point. So let me stop here, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to. Yeah. Yeah, yes, sir. And then Venkat, you. Yeah, yes, sir, please.
Padmanabhan, you ended it with this lifestyle. I think who can be less than 25. In India also now this temperature is less than 20 and we are wearing jackets and coat. I think it's a wastage of energy. Why not to make a policy that no AC will be less than 25 and no need for a jackets and all this thing.
I don't agree with you more. In Japan, they did that. They actually reduced energy consumption due to the measures that you talk about. He is the author of, or the architect of the India cooling program, India action plan for cooling. And I'm sure they've discussed many of these things. But
there is a 24 degrees Celsius
guideline, yeah.
that Ministry of Power has issued. It's not mandatory.
It's very chilly.
Yeah, so I think whether that is being followed and where it is being followed, so I think it's we have a long ways to go.
We have
Yeah,
long.
if I may intervene, Satish is right in that the default setting of ACs in the country should be at 24 degrees C. Okay, we are not following that because we do not have the institutions to implement and monitor what's happening, and that.
Japan, you can't manufacture AC.
Sorry.
In Japan, you can't manufacture
Yeah, that may be possible in the context of Japan's climate, but in India, India is one of the hottest climates. So you will need to have ACs, but the default setting, as Satish said, is indeed to be set at 24 degrees. It is for us to follow, so that's behavioral science. 2, it is for institutions to monitor, to see and ensure that it's being implemented. So we lack, as Tanmay says, that we have all the codes, appliances, standards, but we don't cross the last mile. So that is where we always fall short as a nation. So it possibly speaks of us also as a collective group of people.
Venkat.
In fact, there is empirical evidence on this thing that the hotter the climate, the more adaptive people are to higher temperatures, and it has been proven through many studies around the world. So India can actually survive on 26, 27 degrees,
28
not
probably.
24. I think, and there are studies, there are adaptive thermal comfort studies that actually do this. But I think as Prabir and I think as Tanmay are saying that there are lots of policies and regulations, I think, in India. But it's the challenge is, I think, whether some of these first principle based things are actually getting translated. Some of the countries are better than that, I think, in implementing these things. Whereas we argue and we talk a lot, but I think uniform implementation becomes a challenge.
Compliance has always been an issue. Yeah, Venkat.
I am A. Venkat Krishnan, an electrical engineer, and meeting Padu after 44 and a half years, my college engineering flatmate. I'm so happy that. Oh, thank you. I am meeting Padu after 44 and a half years, my engineering college batchmate, and I am so happy that this incident has happened in Delhi, because I'm here for the last 62 years, where now something is happening in my life which is going to open up. And there are 6 questions to the topic, because I loved that word, renovation of housings, and it's going to happen in any time now. I want to install 30 kilowatt solar power panel on my rooftop.
Good.
For connecting lighting, low tension, only lights and fans on 2 floors and the basement part to a total of 5,000 square feet. So my 6 questions are: number 1, what are the formalities? Anybody can answer?
Well,
because I would like to go through them.
Let's talk about it offline. It will take a long time. Yeah, let's talk about it offline, Venkat, because
Okay, I'll mention the question.
you mentioned the questions and then we'll talk about it offline.
Okay. Second is, who are the agencies or approved vendors for these?
No
things?
issue, no issue.
Okay. Number 3, with I'm proposing that I will be using aluminum frames.
Okay.
With mounting aluminum frames and this 30 kilowatt, what will be the total
Okay.
cost? Okay. What subsidy the resident owner will get for installing?
No, not an
this
issue.
system?
Yeah, it's well written.
Okay. What is the process with Discom to connect to the grid?
Okay.
Okay. And
Will
sorry. And how will Discom pass the credit of the excess energy that I'm going to pass on to the grid? Now, the very latest innovation which has happened, I'm sure all of you must be aware, Australia, after a lot of research with the university, has already commercialized solar panels in roll forms. You can roll it out like a carpet. Okay. Now, since you are all in the policy making and all that, will such a thing happen ever in India? Will there be some tie-up being manufactured with the latest Indo-Aussie FTA or with productivity linked whatever incentive? Will this ever happen, which is much easier to install?
these questions can be answered? Yeah. Yes, sir. The gentleman in the back.
It's a very good presentation. I have not read the book yet, but I just wanted to ask you about your radical vision of sustainability. What form of energy is the you have for the radical vision? Is this and you didn't talk much about nuclear energy. Is there another?
No, that's not part of my radical vision.
Okay.
Not for any other reason. I mean, one can discuss about various sources of energy, but this book essentially makes the point that one needs to move to the demand side of the energy equation, period. And that refrain is right through. Number two, the radical vision is efficiency and more of efficiency. But efficiency in and by itself is not going to cut it. We need to have supply too. That supply would be green supply to the extent that we use renewables, and then we use alternates like green hydrogen and so on in what is known as an integrated energy network. There is a description in one of the chapters about that. The book also recognizes the fact that we are largely coal-based power generation. We can't do away with coal. We can't transit away from coal overnight. So we'll have to continue with coal, but you've got to use coal efficiently, both in the generation side of it, in the preparation side of it. And we have to transition away from coal through what is known as just transition. There is a little bit of a mention on things of that kind. The book also looks at certain technologies such as cogeneration and trigeneration technologies without going too far into the technological descriptions. I want to make that point here very clearly. This book is not a technical book, but you have to be a technical person to kind of appreciate it. It is essentially for the next generation to be enthused and enthusiastic about an energy resource which has been tapped into by certain entrepreneurs in the past without government support or whatever, and had a modicum of success. In some cases, outstanding success such as the green building movement. And all of this has happened here. We don't have to look outside the country for inspiration. It's all homemade brew. Many countries in the region have received support on energy efficiency through technical assistance, through bilateral and multilateral programs. I've worked in bilateral agencies, I've worked in multilateral agencies. India is one country which has received some support, but largely has developed it indigenously. And we have developed it indigenously over a period of time through the efforts of individuals. And there's a description of some of these individuals who played a role. But again, it's not hunky-dory as though, you know, these people were manna from heaven or anything of that kind. It's people who learned through mistakes. You know, some of the work done on petroleum conservation, particularly because we started with petroleum conservation, has been done through indigenous efforts, not R&D, but through common sense approaches. And this is some of those common sense approaches. See, one thing, I mean, there are a number of anecdotes here, but there's one anecdote which comes to mind. Way back in 74 or 75, in that time frame, and this will be of interest to the younger generation here, we mounted a national campaign on petroleum conservation through the media, through the vernacular media. In that time, media was newspapers, right? And a little bit on radio, on how to save fuel in the kitchen, how to save fuel here, there, everywhere, in automobiles, etc. And we came out with these tips. No one talks about it these days because it's well understood. But there, we put a small note saying, if you want additional information, please write to us and we'll send you brochures. That's all we said. So it came out in Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, etc. You won't believe it. And I was in Surya Kiran building on Kasturba Gandhi Marg. You know, I was in PCRA those days on deputation there. And we all very enthusiastic, we put it. We received from all over the country, in a matter of a month, more than 10 to 15 lakh letters. That was the amount of interest that this country had. The Parliament Street post office, that guy was fed up. And even in our office, we stopped work with trying to respond to this. Then we subcontract it to somebody in Kashmiri Gate, and then he handled the whole thing. The point I'm trying to make is, energy efficiency is all about consumers. It's a decentralized decision. If consumers are enthusiastic and are willing to kind of go forward, it can happen. And we really tapped into a lot of interest. Unlike, for instance, in the US, when they tried to push the energy efficiency program through customer education, they had a problem. People were just not interested. You won't get that kind of response. And this is 74, So I'm making this point to tell you that there is a huge amount of churning going on, and people are doing it. And if you really follow what they are doing, the savings is considerable. But there's no record in monitoring these savings and measuring these savings and saying that we have saved so much. But if somebody puts up this 30 kilowatt rooftop system, then everyone comes and claps and says, fantastic, and Venkat, you've done a great job, etc., etc. But if somebody saves 30 kilowatts, no one even recognizes it. It is far easier to put up a 1,000 megawatt power plant. That's the point. It requires only 4 people or 4 institutions to take a decision to put up a 1,000 megawatt power plant. And we have done it time and time and time again. But try to save 1,000 megawatts from the grid. How much of effort, how many people have to be involved, how many people have to be educated, etc. So this book says the demand side of the energy equation is what we need to tap. We have got examples of where we have been able to do it, like the example I told you about people interested in fuel efficiency and so on and so forth. We've got to tap that energies. That's all. That's the point it makes. Any other? Yeah. Yes, Srinivas.
Yeah. I want to share an experience of how it becomes effective.
Ah.
We talked of. You mentioned briefly about cement being one of the lowest cost producers, and I can tell you that as Secretary General of the Cement Association at one time, I played a major role in pushing government as well as industry. And what really happens is to show them that you make money by being efficient. That's what you need to do. Government had restricted at one time how much capacity you can build. We asked government to give it up. We told industry was losing money. They were competing with each other. They were competing with each other on price. I told them, don't compete on price, compete with each other on efficiency. Earlier, a cement plant executive would not let an executive of another plant or another competitor to come in.
Right.
We changed all that. We had the best of technology brought into India. Every 3 months, we had exhibitions where equipment was brought in, where technology was spoken about. And in a period of 5 to 6 years, India became the lowest cost cement producer in the world. We had data about one cement plant in Japan being more efficient. So we took a delegation from India to Japan to visit them. And then we realized that that data was wrong because they don't consider energy on extraction of limestone because they don't have limestone resources. It's imported for them. Whereas in India, extraction cost of limestone is added to the cost of cement production. So actually over a period of time, cement industry let executives from each other's factory visit, shared problems, and we said, don't worry, capacity, you cannot grow fast. Demand in India will grow faster than capacity. So you don't worry about this, let each other go. And I said, if I want to know what's happening in your factory, I have to only employ one of your executives who will share data with me. So don't try to prevent the other chap from coming in. Be open. So actually problems of one cement plant, sometimes an engineer from another cement plant would come and solve. That's how it happened. So the moment each cement plant, there were the top 25%, when they started introducing it and got into latest technology capacity, others automatically followed. Today, India is the lowest cost cement producer, and in fact, in terms of quality also, probably some of the best. China tried to dump a lot of cement into Bangladesh. Bangladesh bought it for some time, then stopped. They stopped getting clinker from China because it didn't meet quality standards. So basically, the success of any of these efforts will be to make a business case for them.
You know, this is interesting, and we all know that India has done very well in the cement sector, but there's a broader point in what you said, and maybe that would be a point which I'd like to share with the audience, and the book actually has a chapter on that, that efficiency is not about saving energy only. You know, there's a very narrow way of looking at it. Every efficiency project is accompanied by a number of co-benefits. People go in for green buildings not because they save energy, it's because they improve the indoor air quality, they improve lifestyles of people, they improve the healthy environment. Similarly, in industry, you don't save energy to save energy, you save energy to improve the quality of your product. There's a direct relationship between the quality of production, the quality of the product that you make, and the amount of energy you use. And it is these co-benefits, if you start kind of looking at that and trying to value that, that's even more valuable than the energy that you save. And that is now coming to the fore. Cement industry did not go in for energy efficient cement processes just because they wanted to save on energy. They did it because the quality of the clinker is much better, and then efficiency is a byproduct. So I think that that's another important aspect in when we talk about efficiency. Yes, sir. Can you kindly introduce yourself and then?
Good evening. Dr. Tiwari. I am Principal Advisor Strategic to a Global Government Advisory Enterprise. I was been with Government of India, and we have been working in the artificial intelligence based decision support systems, and probably that's very relevant in this aspect also, one aspect. And then I was also involved in conducting the first green drone pilot course for agriculture sector, and probably that's where I realized that, and before that I must compliment you for writing such a nice book and going through the history and all, and addressing all the issue that concerns, including building code. So probably I have a chance to work with IFCO, and as everyone knows that it is IFCO amongst the all cooperative organizations of the world has come first, and it's a matter of pride for India. Though I am not from IFCO, but then I complimented the chairman of it. And the thing which came to my notice that it is for the knowledge of everyone is that IFCO has produced some, this nano urea that people know, and and then nano urea and another product that is Agarica. One is promoting organic farming. Obviously, you know the benefit of organic farming. You are much more qualified, and to reduce the carbon footprint and toxic emissions and the global warming. Is that I also got electric vehicle component, the EV. So what we found that the per kilometer cost of the transportation, which came around 10 to 12 rupees, could be brought to 6 paise per kilometer. So it's one way that in one way you are bringing down the cost. And then I have a little bit of aviation background and also armed forces background, using that pilotless tactical aircraft when we used to do in our operations long time back, which you hear these days drones, which we used long time back. So in that, what happened that as for the government policy, you must know government is increasing drones. And so one aspect of energy efficiency is that once you are doing the spray, but so what happens that the nano urea, it's nano urea, the earlier around 85% thing of the urea, it is the 500 ml of bottle is equivalent to around 45 kg of the sack. So what happens that, and the almost 85% of it now of this nano urea goes inside the field. So India has done a major advancement in that. Imagine somebody carrying 10 bottles, which he can carry simply in one hand, and 500 kg being carried on load. So that way, it is a great advance has been made. First and then you are saving the manpower also by use of technology intervention, and also when you are doing that spray, that chemical spray inside the field. The adverse effect on climate and also on the health effect of the farmers, like around by the odd figure around 60,000 people die each year because of snake bite and other things, and because of the toxic consumption of the spray that chemicals comes. So I'm very happy that if this aspect also by your August panel, and somewhere since you've been one of the leading persons, and all these people those who are sitting here are in the forefront of doing this energy efficiency, and if we in any way could cooperate as far as the bringing the artificial intelligence based decision support system. We already working in the field of disaster management. We developed the module also. And the second aspect that you was told about building code, probably it has been realized by the panel that let it be any code, but it is a fire code. I was head of, till recently I was head of safety emergency management of IIT Delhi. So there we always used to have this, that one is that you develop a technology, and it's a bit difficult to implement it. But anyway, it is very encouraging that the per square feet of the green buildings that has come up. It's really encouraging.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I cannot react to everything that you said, but certain elements of what you said is something that I empathize with, and particularly the issue of organic farming and so on. There is some discussion about that, where we found that where there was organic farming, see, one of the advantages is that the water retention in the soil is much greater, and to that extent you don't have to use a whole lot of groundwater. We looked at the agricultural sector from the point of view of the water energy nexus, which I think is important. It's not just the energy savings, but the water savings too. But the other things on artificial intelligence, etc., to be very frank with you, we have not employed such thinking yet in the efficiency domain, but I'm sure there is an possibility and an opportunity. If there's no further questions, then
can I make just a minute?
Oh, sure, but keep it very brief.
Just a minute. See, since we are at the concluding stage, and it has been so well moderated by Satish, and so brilliantly, in fact, interjected by Padu. See, we have in the context of energy efficiency, we have talked about the policy's role. We have talked about the importance of institutional strengthening. We have talked about the regulatory compact that is necessary. We have also talked about the lifestyle and behavioral aspects that are necessary to have energy efficiency cultivated amongst the populace. There is one aspect we need to keep in mind, is that energy efficiency also has a resource adequacy context. And by resource adequacy, I would define that demand scenarios are to be built net of energy efficiency and demand response programs, consequent upon which we need to build portfolios of capacity additions, and subsequently have the resource adequacy framework built on an hour-to-hour basis. So that is where energy efficiency gets integrated and mainstream, and we have an example of the retail operations integrating with wholesale market operations. That is where the ultimate objective of energy, the role of energy efficiency should be. Thank you.
Very well put, but he said it in such high technical language. But basically what he says, if I may interpret it in simple layman's language, is you work on the supply side, you work on the demand side, and then work on both sides. Then you will get the right conclusion. If you just work on one side, then you're not solving the problem. Now, that mix, that integrated energy network, is what he mentioned in such clear, concise terms. So, thank you very much. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious about Venkat's question. Oh, thank you. And if one has to implement, one has to go through so many requirements, and then you stop short of telling the government or advising the government. Who else is more competent than you are, based on what the panelists are saying about your expertise and all that? You should really go ahead and tell the government that we need to have an energy efficiency department or ministry. And
thank you, sir.
And then that should flow into making things easy for people like Venkat to put up energy.
And save also.
Thank you. That's a good way to end the session. but we are trying. I mean, there are a lot of people out there who are trying to make that point. AEEE, the Alliance for Energy Efficient Economy, is a platform established with the private sector in India, which will continue pushing the agenda on this. But I think the time is appropriate now, propitious in many ways, to make the point that efficiency needs to have a separate fiefdom of its own. And I hope you all can also make the point in your discussions with people. You all are all influence peddlers as much as we are, if not more. So,
Tista, you want to give a vote of thanks? Yeah.
Yeah, Tista.
Just to quickly convey on behalf of Planet Moon India, our grateful thanks to all the panelists for sharing your incredible insights today. Padu, thank you for agreeing to, as you said, have some fun and allow us to put this event together. I think one of our objectives in publishing First Fuel was to, generate the kind of conversations we witnessed today, and to take the cause of energy efficiency forward and hope it leads to even better fruition than it already has. And thanks are due in part to everyone on this panel today. Copies of the book are available outside if anyone would like to pick one up. We obviously highly recommend it. Have a good night.
Thank you.